Hey, welcome to This Week in Pharmacy. I'm your host and founder of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, Todd Uri, and I am excited that we just got back from Phoenix, Arizona for the American Pharmacist Association's 2023 Rise Advancing in the Face of Adversity gathering of the largest body of pharmacists in the country and and on fire. They are excited to be pharmacists, and the changing role of the pharmacist is in and of itself exciting. And it's what today's episode is about: is how so many facets of healthcare is changing. The roles of pharmacists are actually expanding, enhancing patient care, especially for chronic diseases. And we're going to celebrate you today. We're also going to be talking about artificial intelligence and the impact on pharmacists, and how, if pharmacists aren't understanding what's available to them and the tools that are available, what's coming, and getting ready for what's coming in the near future, then I think we're going to miss out. So we don't want you to miss out. Pharmacy Podcast Network will always bring some of the best minds to our programming. A shout out to our hosts, the tremendous work that you're doing. A shout out to Kristen Talent. Dr. Talent is working with IX Layer to bring point of care testing to communities and community pharmacies and consultant pharmacists all over the nation. Brady, what a time we had in Phoenix. It was great to have you there, and it was fun. And we got to talk with a tremendous amount of some of the most interesting pharmacists in our nation. But what did you like about the event in Phoenix?
Well, I just loved meeting everybody. I mean, it was so great to meet people like the MyFit pharmacists, the accidental pharmacists. They were hilarious. They were a great time. Hanging out with you and Candace was really fun. And just, my whole thing is audio. So collecting the interviews was just a good time. And overall, just an amazing show.
It was. And we're going to be releasing a recap of the APHA 2023 post show sometime next week. I believe it's coming out, or at least it's starting. I think we had so much content that what are we breaking it into, like 5-part series or 4-part series or something?
It's gotta be. I know once we edited it down, we had about 3 hours of audio. So it's definitely going to be a lot of good content for people to listen to.
That's incredible. Well, you are incredible. Thank you for being there with me, and can't wait to plan the release of the content with you.
Heck yeah. I can't wait for the next one too.
Absolutely. So before we get started with our guests, we're excited that they're here. I do want to go over some of the things that are happening in our nation through pharmacy, and there's a very special conference coming up that we're going to be heading to Vegas and covering as press and media, the Access 2023 Access to Pharmacy, the Assembia Summit. This is one of the most powerful pharmacy conferences I've ever been to. I've been here probably 7 or 8 different times, and this organization brings together the leaders in specialty pharmacy, the payers, the pharmacists, the business people, the management teams, public relation organizations, comms, all descend in Vegas every year for the Access 2023. So we're going to be there. So if you are interested in specialty pharmacy or building your specialty pharmacy business, and there's an opportunity to talk with you at this conference, please get in touch with me. Before we get to my favorite part of today, which is really talking with 2 incredible people about pharmacists and the role of artificial intelligence and how information will continue to advance healthcare, I do want to talk about what came out just yesterday, March 30th, from the Washington Post. Pharmacists are burning out. Patients are feeling the effects. This is a serious issue, and I want to bring it up because pharmacists are burning out, and there's reasons for that. I think there's an economy, an ecosystem that is in play right now that's putting way too much pressure on pharmacists that just came out of a pandemic that, we could say as providers, they saved the nation. They not only tested, but they administered more vaccines in a short period of time than in our history of the country in the state that it was, and also the barriers that we've had. We've never shut down an economy like that at the level that we had to get through it. So I want you to read this. If you're listening right now, this is the Washington Post. It's titled "Pharmacists Are Burning Out, Patients Are Feeling the Effects." And I also wanted to give a shout out to pharmacists who are immunizing. There's a whole team of pharmacists out of Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh School of Pharmacy, and Duquesne University. Those are the closest pharmacists here to the studio down here in Brownsville, Pennsylvania, the Pittsburgh area. FDA was approved, and the article at Medscape approves the over-the-counter naloxone, but is it going to be a cost barrier? And we really wanted to talk about this. We're actually going to have a naloxone pharmacist expert, opioid use disorder treatment pharmacist kind of dig into this. So stay tuned for a future episode of This Week in Pharmacy. And one more article that I really wanted to bring up was going back to burnout. Why are pharmacists burnout? Well, it's the payment system, really. If you dig into the economy and you dig into the pressures that payment systems put on big national chains and different facets of pharmacy, and then that, of course, trickles down to the work that we expect the pharmacist to do and do it properly. Medication reviews are not 3 minutes. Medication review is a 20, 40, sometimes a 1 hour session with people that are in desperate need of a pharmacist to disseminate and decide and ask lots of questions to keep people healthy. And this article, prescription drug middlemen face mounting pressure from federal governments and states. This just came out today, March 31st, on MarketWatch. And we know that PBMs have got to take a look at their business models and understand that it just can't move forward with 330 million Americans needing pharmacy services. We don't have the bandwidth the way that it's set up right now. And we'll continue to talk about it through PBM Reform. We have a podcast called PBM Reform Podcast, and we're excited that we're going to have some additional hosts. Just had Alan Rosenblum on our last episode. He was talking about the effects of PBMs and some of the trickle-down effects on our seniors. If you haven't listened to that, definitely take a listen at PBM Reform podcast, and you can find that in all of our podcasting directories. Hey, Pharmacy Podcast is honored to be teaming up with Drug Topics for the April 8th virtual summit. It's called the Total Pharmacy Solution Summit, and I will be the MC of this event. I am excited to be talking with Dr. Ungst and Dr. Trin and Chuck Snyder, and our prescriptive health team as well, led by Billy Chow and Paige Clark. These people are dynamic. They're moving pharmacies forward with technology. And that's an excellent segue into our episode today, because I have two amazing guests that we're going to be bringing in right now, because we are going to be talking about the impact of technology and pharmacists and what pharmacy has, what opportunities that are at our fingertips with the amazing concept of artificial intelligence. And it was brought to my attention through a presentation that Gil Bashe and Tom Lawry did together called The Power of Information to Improve Healthcare. I was a big fan of their presentation that came out about a month ago, and it's available through YouTube, and we'll be actually linking to that. But I want to welcome to the show Tom Lawry. Thank you so much for being on This Week in Pharmacy.
It is my pleasure. Anytime I get a chance to show up and hang out with Gil Bashe, I'm in.
You're always so gracious, but I'll tell you, I walk away from every conversation a lot smarter. And I think Pharmacy Podcast Network reaches out to about 100,000 pharmacists. That's like 30% of the active pharmacy community. So we're going to be in conversation with Todd with the opportunity to really share wisdom, because Todd just was talking about burnout of pharmacists. I think you really are at the forefront of helping them get to doing what they really want to do, which is caring for patients instead of worrying about stuff. So Todd, thank you so much for having us on the program.
You're so welcome. And just to introduce you, you are Gil Bashe. You are the
I am
Chair Global Health and Purpose at Finn Partners and Editor-in-Chief of Medica Life, which I'm a very proud mini contributor to that, and that magazine and e-zines come a long way. But I am just thrilled to have both of you here, and I want to open this up as a three-way discussion today to really dig into the possibilities. I want to challenge Tom to give us an outline of what is, and then I also want to shift gears and challenge Gil to tell us a little bit about what he believes could come, based on the coming of together of multiple, let's say, plate tectonics of technology and how healthcare can be improved with such healthcare. And so I want to start with Tom first, so because there's people that aren't viewing us live as we're on TWIRx right now. We're on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, streaming live, and thank you so much if you're watching us live. But Tom, for the podcast listener that listens to this afterwards, could you give them an understanding of your role? And your roles have been extremely interesting. So I want you to share that with our audience.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me on your podcast. It's an awesome opportunity. So I have had the opportunity to do many things. I'm currently managing director for Second Century Technology, which is an advisory firm. I also have a book, Hacking Healthcare, which is my latest, came out in July, Amazon bestseller. And anyway, prior to that, I see myself as a recovering Microsoft executive, where I spent 14 years at Microsoft in various roles for data and AI. So the last one was National Director of Artificial Intelligence for Health and Life Sciences. Prior to that, I was Director of Worldwide Health, which meant most of my work for 6 years was with top healthcare organizations outside the United States. So I've always been in and around data and analytics applied to healthcare. And obviously, we've come a long way just in the last few years. Probably we'll talk about it, but even in the last few months, there have been a number of incredible breakthroughs that we all need to be thinking about relative to how it impacts healthcare and how it impacts any knowledge worker working in healthcare.
Well, thank you for that. I have so many questions. I'm gonna take it one at a time, or we'll be here until 9 o'clock tonight. So we gotta keep this to a 40-minute conversation. But I always want more. Gil, give our listeners, if people don't know who Gil Bashe is, just give us kind of a quick overview about yourself.
Well, Gil Bashe is still trying to figure out who is Gil Bashe. And I think that's a real plus, that I live in the question. But my journey, Tom, has really centered around ideas and applying those ideas to improve human health. Actually, at the very core of it, I started as a military combat medic in the paratroopers, and that gave me some perspective about healing and conversation. And I noticed at that very early juncture of my life, when people were seriously injured, whether they be military or civilian, they had questions and they wanted answers from me. They weren't as consumed about what I was doing as opposed to what was happening to them. And I recognized at that moment that communications is part of the care. It's part of the cure. And that kept me grounded through my journey. You know, I've been part of communications organizations. I've been privileged to be CEO of the world's largest health communications organization, one of the first integrated marketing organizations back actually in the 90s. It's hard to say. I've spent time on the policy end as a lobbyist for the health industry. I had the privilege of being part of a CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Beneficiary Services working group around communications to the pharmacy community, interestingly enough. And then I've really committed myself both to open communications and information. But in that, I had stints dealing with finance. Interestingly enough, I was with one of the larger private equity groups in the United States for some time doing transaction analyses. So from all of this, from the sense of provider and communicator, financing business and so forth, I've always been interested in how our system can work optimally. And what I found is information is the essential nugget that draws us together. When physicians or pharmacists leave school, they're filled with inspiration and information. What happens to the inspiration or information? You just said previously before we came on, well, they burn out. Obviously, the inspiration from the beginning of the journey isn't sufficient enough to keep them going. And so I'm very, very aware of that. And so when I had the opportunity to meet Tom through Microsoft, actually, I was just at Vive visiting the Microsoft booth, and Tom is still a favorite among his Microsoft colleagues. He claims he's a recovering Microsoft, sort of like, former leader. They still see him as part of the community, even though he's on his new adventure. So that's the beauty of having knowledge and reputation and having information to share. I'm just thrilled to be with you, but I'd have to say what drives me is probably what drives Tom. We're seeking to make the system better for the people who are committed to that system, pharmacists and patients, and recognizing that when information is readily and easily accessible, it's meaningful and applicable. That's the problem. I'd have to say, by the way, if you could buy two books, I highly recommend you buy Hacking Healthcare, which is Tom's book. If you have enough money left over and you can find it, you can get Branding Health Services by Gil Bashe. But it's out of print now. Maybe I'll do another one. Tom is much more prolific than I am when it comes to book writing. I'm on the digital side today. Tom is cranking out books. This is, by the way, a plug for Tom. He doesn't need it. This is Tom's second great book, not the first one. So this book is the Bible, I would say. If you're interested in AI, get the book.
Hacking
Gil, I'm starting to blush. I'm gonna have to go off camera, but thank you for that.
Well, you said I get 10% of every sale. So
okay, I'm gonna reach for my checkbook right now.
So I'm gonna paint you a scenario. It's a literal scenario, Tom. And Gil, I want you to participate in this exercise. Let's take specialty pharmacy. I've been in many, and one of the ones that I first attended was in the Midwest, and now they've become part of Hy-Vee. It's called Amber Pharmacy. Mike Agostino, I'll never forget him. He built that company from the ground up. It was a family-based business. He's not part of that organization anymore because they sold off and many things happened. But when I went there, we were selling a pharmacy management system, which literally helped to run the entire organization, their inventory, their workflow, best practices. And I remember this was 2000, maybe 14 or 15. They started to build Excel-based reactions to medications, right? So they would say the patient was on a cancer medication. It was day 7, and the pharmacy technician who was calling to check on the patient and getting ready to transfer them to the pharmacist who had additional questions started asking the ABC question or a scale question. On a scale from 1 to 10, patient, X, are you nauseated? On a scale from 1 to 10, how nauseated are you? They take down the data. And this happened with thousands of patients. And then sometimes they would escalate to a pharmacist who then would ask additional questions, as well as talk about other disease states or conditions or comorbidity. Maybe they were on multiple medications. So the specialty pharmacist was key to keeping the patient on target and on therapy, but they were also defining the pathway without artificial intelligence. So when I think of all of those data points, collection, and we have all this data, if I had a pharmacogenomics test that tested the ability of a specific patient's by their genes, how fast they're going to absorb medication, how well they're going to respond to it, and I coupled all of that collection data that I just described with that specialty pharmacy patient, imagine what artificial intelligence could tell our pharmacists to give them a leeway to say 87% of the patients that were on this drug on day 9 felt like they were nauseated at a level 7, and it's all in front of them. And now the patient hears the voice of a trusted pharmacist that they know, and it says, "Hey, Mary, you're probably feeling kind of nauseated today." "Yes, I am." Probably like a scale from 1 to 10. What is your scale? It comes in around a 7. "Great. Okay, listen, you can eat this, 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 and this to make yourself feel better today. Maybe some ginger, maybe whatever. This excites me because this is where AI becomes realistic instead of science fiction. And Tom, I want you to take that scenario and everything that you know from a science perspective and kind of give our audience kind of a, what's the realism of AI right now?
Wow, there were how many questions in what you just teed up? But okay, so first of all, starting out, when you look at the emerging and actually the pervasive nature of where we're going with AI, it is a true force. Now, having said that, there's been a lot of hype through the last 5 years, particularly in health and medicine. It has been the shiny object. There are many things that have been said and promised that frankly, they're not fact-based or based in science. But when you look at the use cases, and then you look at things like you mentioned, the challenge of fighting a global pandemic, and you look at the front line of what pharmacists did, and I truly believe, one of the good things about the pandemic was it brought forward and shined a light on the role of organizations like retail health and the frontline role of pharmacists, which before was, probably not as visible. But when it comes to AI, I did a piece for Forbes a while back where they said, tell us what healthcare learned by fighting a global pandemic. And the three themes of the article were: one, an industry that is known for moving at glacial speed can move at warp speed when it needs to. Two, many clinical leaders, not all, many clinical leaders demonstrated their willingness to challenge the status quo and go through agile transformation. Third, and I think to your point of your question, when you look closely, humans fought and won the battle when it comes to the global pandemic. The number one tool they used to go faster and be better was AI. And I go through the article and outline a number of examples from expediting vaccine development to many other things. So I bring that together. I look at your question, and I'll come back to the story you told leading up to the question, where when you map the process historically that pharmacists, who are these talented knowledge workers with specialized knowledge, have, and you look at the past where things would mainly be done by humans alone with their brain power making decisions. We have the ability now to take some of those things and kind of outsource it to artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is really good at things like sorting through massive amounts of data, spotting patterns, and all the things you talked about earlier are things that AI can do, bring together those patterns. So rather than a human having to go through that decision tree in their mind, imagine actually having certain parameters where those things are getting teed up automatically based on risk profiles that then allow the pharmacist to engage in all those things that are unique to pharmacists as humans, which is their knowledge, their experience, their wisdom, their problem-solving capabilities. It's when you bring the best of AI together with the humans by bringing that in behind what they do. And then finally, for my long soliloquy, you were talking earlier about the workforce crisis and burnout. Well, it would be interesting to have a conversation around all those highly repetitive but low value activities pharmacists have to do every day, which is ripe for AI to be automating. So I tell a story where on the physician side, Stanford has data that shows physicians spend more time in the EMR than they do with patients today. My guess is there's a story and some stats that relate to pharmacists when it comes to all of the repetitive low-level activities they do that keep them from practicing at the highest level, which is why they probably went to school to become a pharmacist in the first place. So it's understanding the value that AI brings and getting behind the humans as in control and taking the best of what AI does and matching it with the best of what humans do.
Thank you for that. That brings us full circle, and such a complex question. I always just throw all the kitchen sink information at our guests to see what they'd say, and you're eloquent and it made sense, and I can actually, if I understand, that's good because I'm not even a pharmacist, so so it's
You're
good to be.
definitely the voice of the community, though, Todd. You know, I want to pick up where Tom left off. Um, people, particularly now, AI, ChatGPT, are anxious about technologies, and the problem isn't necessarily with the technologies. The challenge is with our mindset, our fear factor. The fear of COVID, to Tom's point, the fear of COVID and what it might do to our world crashed through the fear wall, right? We had already confronted our worst fear. We were on lockdown. We were separated from each other. Physicians could no longer really see their patients up close unless it was an absolute emergency. But what was open for business during that whole time, regardless? Pharmacies. It's fascinating. Doctors were shut down. Only emergency operating procedures were conducted, and pharmacies were open to buy Band-Aids and flu medication and analgesics and questions at the pharmacy counter. So what we see is the human factor and the information factor finding a natural convergence at the pharmacy level. Now, to that end, to our listeners today, pharmacy has played a incredible role of getting us through COVID. And I don't think our society really fundamentally understands how important pharmacy has been to our getting to where we are today. Pharmacists were on drug development crews. They worked diligently on vaccine clinical trials. They sat in government. They're in FDA. They're in CMS. They're dealing with on the front lines of senior care, worrying about their medications, worrying about their well-being. Pharmacists touch almost every single aspect of our fragmented health ecosystem. The challenge we face as a society, and I don't think people appreciate sufficiently, is that often our technical training, our professional training for physicians and for pharmacists are built predominantly on a 1990s, 2000 model. And so if you say to a doctor, how much training did you receive on EMRs, on AI, on digital health, on basic technological digital health tools, they would say they talked about it. And if I were to ask and press, did you have a course, one course in 4 years of medical school specific to digital technology? They would say no. Same with pharmacy.
Right.
Same with pharmacy. But there's a big difference. There's a big difference for those people who graduated, and they're the bulk of our health professionals today, who graduated pre the turn of the century, so to speak. They relied on pure knowledge. They were the aggregated intelligence being. Their IQ, which got them into medical school or pharmacy school in the first place, enabled them to remember huge swaths of information. Fast forward 20 years later, not possible, just not possible. How can you possibly imagine, hold on to all the drug to drug interactions that a patient may face? Do you remember that a patient who is taking a statin shouldn't take a grapefruit? I mean, how much stuff do you have to remember to be a pharmacist today? It's inconceivable to me to think about that. So AI, or as I lovingly call it, and I know Tom embraces my definition as well, aggregated intelligence, augmented intelligence, that a pharmacist really is trained to know everything they must know. And they also therefore know everything that they don't remember or don't know. That's where AI comes in. So it's not just looking and trying to predict the future of health. In other words, that on the seventh day with that medication, you may feel queasy. Have a Coca-Cola or something like that, or some ginger to settle your stomach. It's also just remembering the basics of, I've got a patient who's taking metformin, they're taking a statin, they're taking this, they're depressed, and I want to add this medication to it. is there anything I need to know before I hand them here you go. This is a high-tech actually vial of medication. I'm sure it actually is a combination, so that kids can't break into it. Pharmacists are always inventing as well, good gadgets. But before I hand this out to the person, my patient across the counter, I need to know, is it right for me to hand that out? Pharmacists are actually the backbone of the medical system. So for them, in my opinion, I think Tom's going to agree to this, AI is actually the pharmacist's friend. And I agree with Tom 100%. Pharmacists don't really want to spend their days behind the counter counting out tablets or pills. They want to spend it at the counter, in front of the counter, actually giving counsel to patients. And that's what they did so well during COVID.
Well, let me put a finer point on what you just said, Gil. So if you were a newly minted pharmacist or physician in the early 1960s, you'd pretty much go your entire career, about 50 years, before medical knowledge would double. Today, depending on whose survey you're looking at, medical knowledge is doubling every 75 days. So to Gil's point, as a human, you're coming out of the best school, the best pharma residency in the country, and you got a great job knowing 75 days from now, there'll be twice as much knowledge, medically speaking. And that doesn't include all the other data that's growing at an even faster rate, or things like increasingly our use of social determinants data to bring all that together. So, the way I often explain AI is, to Gil's point, as humans, it's our brain that took us to the top of the food chain. We are so smart, or the brain is so great, that we've actually found ways of outsourcing things that previously only the brain could do, which is what we call AI. So our ability to take things like knowledge extraction through AI, pattern recognition, all these things, bring them together to take that data that's doubling every 75 days and turn it into a great asset, rather than, if you use the old-fashioned ways of sorting through data, how do you ever possibly keep up, let alone leverage the value of the insights, the knowledge that's found within this data that's growing at an exponential rate? So that's where you don't have to understand how AI works. What you have to do is understand what it can do. And then, as the smartest person, as a frontline pharmacist, as a researcher, you're the ones, if you know the capabilities of how to bring that in behind what you're doing to make you better at something you care about. That's the value proposition of AI today.
So that in of itself kind of demystifies what AI is doing, and that's my initial question, Tom, and appreciate the kind of opening up of where this is going to go. I think of my listener, my pharmacy technicians, my pharmacists, my pharmacy owners. There's AI behind the scenes of much what's happening in their world today that they may not even be aware of. I want to move to accessing more data in an automated fashion that is literally, you said 75 days. There could be updates made to a patient's record within an hour, within minutes, literally, by the physician pharmacist team, where it's expressing that through technology like the Alexa or the device that can tell them on their watch or their smartwatch or some device that this is taking place. Your blood pressure just hit this. Your metabolization of that medication you took at 9 a.m., it's not going that well, or it is going really well, and that feedback. So I get excited when I got to 10.5 last year. I missed it this year because we were at the APHA, but there was demonstrations by companies and presentations that would show where AI is going to take us. I'm so interested in the pharmacists leveraging it. Do you have ideas or stories that you can share that are applicable to medication management, medication safety, or development?
Well, again, I'm going to be cautious here because I'm not a pharmacist. So when you get me talking about things in front of pharmacists, but generally, I'll start at a high level. You look at things like the application of AI for expediting things like vaccine development during the pandemic, drug discovery, where again, the ability of AI to be much better at looking through massive amounts of data to spot trends that then lead the human researchers towards some findings that will expedite that whole process of either getting something out into production or killing it early to move on with other drugs. You look at things like clinical decision support, whether that's some of the drug interactions that Gil was talking about earlier. You look at how it's looking at the drugs in combination with many other factors when it comes to whether it's an adverse reaction or just looking at what is the optimal combination of pharmaceuticals and other things that have the best ability to move that patient towards whatever medical or health goal you see. Going beyond that, I've had the opportunity to do some work with some large pharma companies, and I think many of them are waking up to the fact that going forward, and you kind of reference it with, again, your example leading up to the question where, we have to start looking beyond just monetizing molecules when it comes to drug development to look at what's the full realm of what we can do. And so I spent a lot of time talking about what I call care anywhere. Gil and I just a couple of weeks ago were at the annual conference of the American Telemedicine Association. So you start looking at remote monitoring, all of the wearables. And then to your point, imagine bringing all of this together because every one of those things generates data. So imagine bringing together many things where what the pharmacist is managing includes not just the traditional role, but a lot of other data that's coming together, putting it at their fingertips to be looking at almost on a real-time, ongoing basis those patients who, probably not every patient, but those who are highly specialized have some type of chronic disease where that ongoing monitoring and management and the ability to have AI firing off alerts, not only for the consumer, but back to the pharmacist, the primary care doctor. That's the technology's there. It's very real. But imagine all that data coming together, and it's not the pharmacist, the doctor having to sort through it. It's really AI sorting through those things. So then if you've got 1,000 patients on that system, it's triaging. And at any given time, it's surfacing to that pharmacist, to that clinician, here are the people that are approaching some thresholds where you should be involved to look at it, to use your wisdom, to use your judgment to say, do we need to do something different? Do we need to have an interaction? Again, the technology's there, the data's there, the intelligent cloud makes that possible. We're just not there when it comes to people in healthcare moving that far along for a number of reasons.
I want to pick up where you ended, Tom, because I don't think the challenge is really about our ability to aggregate information. I think that the challenge is the human being readiness to integrate that information into practice. And speaking specifically about Tom's work in AI, what I'm doing in terms of the communications around the health system, the fragmented health ecosystem, probably more care has to shift over to the pharmacy. And we're seeing that. And the pharmacy is going to be the basis of diagnostic medicine. It's become a base camp for some elements of primary care. You see major retail chains embedding into pharmacies, nurse practitioners, physicians' assistants, and so forth, connected to a network of information and other clinicians in order to help patients. You're going to see pharmacies as the basis of enrollment for drug development, clinical trials. Pharmacy is actually going to become now base camp for our essential health needs, more than get shampoo, Band-Aids, and go to the back of the store to get your prescription. It's really going to be almost like the wiki of health. And so pharmacy schools really need to be at the top of their game, training the next generation of pharmacists to really understand how to maximize what Tom and his colleagues are doing to really build systems around aggregated intelligence. Often I meet with health professionals, and the challenge isn't the quality of the information we're collecting in these systems. It's actually their ability to find time to use the system. And so we have to sit back from the operational level and say, we have the ability to diagnose earlier. We have the ability to avoid drug-to-drug interactions. We have the ability to hone our insight around precision medicine. With all the information we're collecting and aggregating, we can do that today. I don't think Tom will disagree with that. The challenge isn't the information. The challenge is actually giving health professionals, pharmacists, and clinicians the sufficient bandwidth to get rid of certain tasks so that they can actually study the data and apply it in the clinic or in the pharmacy. And I think that, Tom and his work within the health system is trying to do just that. Myself, in terms of working with people within the fragmented health ecosystem, in terms of the communications, I'm trying to do that as well. I think pharmacists have a bigger role to play here than they could possibly imagine, because they're kind of the Switzerland of the U.S. health system. They sort of seamlessly and in a non-threatening way connect all of those fragmented points. And pharmacists actually love data. To be a pharmacist, to go to pharmacy school, you've got to not just love the science, you've got to love where the science is being applied. It's being applied to people. And pharmacists never lose their passion to want to help people live healthier, better lives.
And to Gil's point, we got a small taste of that during the pandemic, where all of a sudden the traditional ways in which things worked were suspended, and we really got to that agile change, and pharmacists went to the head of the line. I think many of the national retail pharmacy companies get that. I think they're well positioned. I think they, some of them made stellar moves to not only, help, citizens with all of their needs. I think it showcased the ability of retail health to play a much bigger role. And to me, the pharmacist is at the center of that. Now, I think the challenge, and Gil, you raised it, is when I think of the experience I have when I go either to the pharmacist as part of my group practice, or when I go to a retail pharmacy that's just in a commercial office or building, and I look at the workflow behind the counter, something has to change, because I see a lot of things that feel like they're the traditional old school way of doing things. And somehow we have to eliminate or mitigate all those repetitive activities we're asking pharmacists and other knowledge workers to do, because at least the data that I see when it comes to physician and nurse burnout, one of the key factors of burnout is the high level of these repetitive, low value activities where, we've turned a lot of physicians into data entry clerks. And maybe that's the same with pharmacy, but somehow we have to look at the process. And again, AI only drives value when it materially changes a process to make things better. So what do we start doing to have that conversation, to be mapping the processes you're using today, and say, which one of these things can we automate to free you up as that very talented, experienced knowledge worker to be, one, playing a much higher value. And my guess is, if you're doing that, you have less likelihood of going home at night thinking, that you're not doing what you were trained to do. But therein, I think, lies the challenge. I think we need to pull pharmacists forward, but in order to do that, we have to rethink, the ways in which we work today, which is the conversation around the value of AI.
I think the data that's extracted, as you were saying, both of you, is important, and what kind of data that can be reacted to by specialists. I think of our diabetes specialists. There are pharmacists out there who are masterful in helping people to manage their diabetes. And then you start to put in technology, insulin management systems, or continuous glucose monitoring, and then the world of blood testing and the data that's extracted from that. All of this is coming to a point where the data is shared between the physician who kicked off the treatment and the pharmacist who's reacting to the data 90 days, 1 year after the initial treatment was implemented. And now the AI is telling the pharmacist that based on data, the treatment needs to be adjusted to hone in on and making the patient live as freely and as possible from, such chronic diseases or something.
No,
And
Todd,
that excites me.
you're really hitting a hot button right now, because this country has a diabetes epidemic. And I'm not just talking about the pre-diabetic, I'm talking about the person who graduated from pre-diabetes to type 2 diabetes. And it is probably one of the most expensive health conditions that our nation is dealing with. It's an epidemic proportions. And now what Tom and you were just talking about before in terms of information and training, well, these days, the diabetes blood glucose monitor and the diabetes insulin pump for people who are really insulin dependent can speak to each other.
Mhm.
And they can actually also speak to the physician or the pharmacist. This is a case people get worried about AI. Put their worry aside. AI is the ally here. AI is the Switzerland of patient care. One, pharmacists really are at the forefront of this health challenge of diabetes. Behind the counter in most pharmacies, you're going to see blood glucose meters. You're going to see, obviously different types of insulin products. All different types of pens I've got here, to look at, from different companies. And pharmacists are really in the know. Diabetes nurse educators most certainly, but when it comes to the technology involved in this, it shouldn't be left just to the companies that are manufacturing the technology. Pharmacists really could play a major role here if they have access to both the training and the information. Boy, I think we could get our arms around this epidemic. And again, it goes back to AI. Pharmacists are really passionate about care, passionate. They really see these people not just as patients, but people who are their customers. Pharmacists will drive to your house after the store closes to deliver a medication if you can't get there. Doctors don't do that any longer. Ever hear of a doctor making a house call any longer? Not really, but pharmacists all the time. So, I think that if we can find a way to overcome our cultural challenge, our fears around information, and really embrace the pharmacist as this bridge between the person who has a health concern, the person who makes the prescribing decision, the physician. Pharmacists are that bridge. If we can make that bridge sturdy with information, I think we're going to see progress in America.
Let me take that one step farther if we have a second. So one of the things that I've seen in my experience when it comes to AI actually driving change and driving change at scale, it has a little to do with technology and data. Frankly, it has a lot to do with what I call the leadership imperative. And in that, the number one thing, as simple as it sounds, is people who are used to running things a certain way in healthcare have to learn to think differently. And that's everyone from the pharmacist to the food chain going up to, the board level. And just to put a finer point on this, so we're having this great conversation about diabetes, huge issue here in America. I'm working with a group out of Singapore where Singapore government has literally, they call it declaring war on diabetes. Singapore has one of the largest problems with diabetes in all of Asia. They're doing something interesting. They're actually making use of AI. They've got 5 million citizens. They're making use of what's known as deep neural networks, the cloud, and the application of advanced nudge theory to say, how do we identify citizen in the population of pre-diabetic, and how do we, through AI, through real-time monitoring and very personalized nudges driven by AI to each citizen, how do we slow the progression from pre-diabetic to diabetic? So it's a combination of everything the pharmacist would be doing, but we're going to that next level to say, well, what are the things that I would call digital therapeutics that are data and AI driven? Can we add to the role of the pharmacist? And the early data shows they are actually slowing the progression of pre-diabetic to diabetic. I know the Singapore government, from the data I've seen, once someone crosses over to being fully diabetic, it costs the government, who's the payer and the provider, about $7,000 a year per citizen for as long as they're alive. So imagine bringing all this together in this integrated care anywhere fashion with the pharmacist at the center of helping to manage all of that. We're improving, the health of a large population. $7,000 per citizen. Well, if we can slow the progression by even a few years, there's a great economic advantage. And then it gets back to, it's a model that also involves the citizen being part of this whole thing as far as the nudges and taking steps that get rewarded. So this is, to me, is a good example of, we need to start thinking differently. We have the tools, we have the power to do it. It's all those experienced clinicians, including pharmacists, that are going to be the best and smartest at saying, I understand what AI can do. I'm thinking differently. Here are all the different ways in which we should start pivoting based on the challenges and based on the opportunity.
I appreciate that. And that's that in and of itself makes it pliable. It's tangible. I can put my hands around and understand that it's not a mystery. It's not future anymore. It's literally happening right now. And I think the more pharmacists and physicians that start leveraging AI to accelerate treatments and outcomes and decisions, and based on data and what's already been collected from all of these electronic health records over the years, and then therefore the physician can spend more time with the patients and less time pressing and clicking the buttons in the big EHR systems, and really sit with the patient and be the physician that the patients want. They want more hands-on and less clicky of the buttons. And I think that's medicine. Allow the AI to do some of the decision tree, basis of the next prescriptions that set out, electronic prescribing, and integrated into systems that I saw at APHA when I was there. Some of the AI application, Tom, in pharmacy is phenomenal. There's a company called Prescriptive Health that is leveraging AI in a pharmacy consulting program on purpose to start making decisions based on data to give the final understanding to the physician pharmacist teams. And I got to see it kind of in action and in the demo that was there. So
that's where, I mean, to me, I often see people who are the best experts kind of fearful. It's like, well, I don't know anything about AI. Well, I'm not a data scientist. And, just what you said, I mean, there are great data scientists. There are great companies looking at how to do things. The smartest people ever that's going to figure out how to use AI to solve problems are not the data scientists. They're not the chief technology officers. They're the people with the expertise and the training on the front lines. When you're driving home at night, you're thinking, if only there was a better way to do this. You are the people that will have the best ideas that can be applied when it comes to taking the data and the AI tools and having someone build something and deploy something that's going to drive change and transformation. So I often see people that are, they're highly trained as clinicians, as pharmacists, but somehow they do that. I don't get AI, and therefore it's like, no, you're exactly the people who know the biggest problems and the ideas for how you're going to solve them.
Yeah, Tom, I'm thinking of 3 words: imagination, innovation, information. We are a species that is highly imaginative. We see problems, we imagine solutions. We invent, we innovate, but how do we know it's working? How do we know it's meaningful? Information. We've got to leave ourselves open to the possibility that information will never replace humanity. It will make us stronger, smarter, faster. As you mentioned during COVID, to really apply solutions that sustain and save life.
Thank you. Thank you both. And I want to just thank you for being here on This Week in Pharmacy. And Tom, I'm thrilled to have you on our show. I think it's wonderful to give our pharmacists an opportunity to hear from you. And for people that can't see the screen right now, hold that up. Hacking Healthcare by Tom Lawry. This is a book that a pharmacist, if you want to dig deeper into the impact of AI in healthcare and be part of it, you have to be part of it. You're the most trusted healthcare provider in healthcare, based on many surveys that have been taken, and pharmacists have to get involved. But Tom, this has been an absolute honor and pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you. And I would just, final comment based on what you just said. For everyone listening, go away thinking that AI is not about technology, it's about empowerment. You have many challenges. We have the ability to bring this in behind people like you, to make healthcare better. It's a very noble cause. It really needs help. And I believe that in the right hands, again, it's all about empowerment and change. It's not about technology.
Thank you. Gil, it's always good having you back. You're starting to become a cyclical regular.
I'm glad that Tom's presence made that possible, and just a great thinker. And Tom, will you be at HIMSS?
I will be. I'll look forward to seeing you in Chicago.
We'll see each other there, and look forward, everyone, to our selfie.
If there are pharmacists going to HIMSS, if they can say hi to Gil Bashe, if you're there, you should all meet at some place and have like a pharmacist gathering.
Especially if Tom is next to me. That would be a real treat. Meeting Gil Bashe, you can do that anytime. But Tom Lawry, that's special.
Well, you're very kind. And I always love getting together with people on the front lines who are either working on transformation or already in the thick of looking at how we're going to change and make things better.
Thank you both. This Week in Pharmacy, Tom Lawry, Gil Bashe. This has been wonderful. You guys have a great weekend. All right. Well, This Week in Pharmacy is growing. We've heard some really good feedback from the pharmacist listeners. We want to know what you want to talk about this week in pharmacy. This is about what's happening in the trenches. And sometimes we jump into subjects that are impacting from a national level, but I want to hear stories from each of you that are listening to things that need to be to given attention. So if you have any ideas, if you have programming that you'd like to throw ideas at us, I just want to give a shout out to Omnipod for supporting us. They have been an awesome partner. They have been a sponsor for the PPN for some time. A great organization to work with. We got to see them at the APHA. A shout out to Dean and his team at Omnipod Insulin by Omnipod, Omnipod by Insulin. We are excited about next week. We're going to be talking with a local politician here in Fayette County, Scott Dunn, about the opioid impact and fentanyl impact on our county. And we're going to kind of dig into this because we have a new series coming called Opioid RX. Once again, that's called Opioid RX. Be on the watch and on the listen. And you are our favorite providers, pharmacists, pharmacy technicians, the right hand of pharmacists. If there's anything that we can do for you as a publication and shining more light on what's happening in our nation and the impact of pharmacy care and pharmacists, please let us know. We're going to wrap up a little early today. This Week in Pharmacy, brought to you by Omnipod. Thank you so much for listening today. Have a great weekend.